go through a quick presentation. Okay, can everybody see this? I take it that was a yes. Yes. Thank you. What I want to do tonight is give you an overview of the project and some details on how we created the survey and the map in the first place. So back in 2019, I just joined Lancaster University, and a research student there created a process to try to identify which buildings in Ambleside might be suitable for solar panels. And at that time, I was working as a consultant in the business innovation department at the university. And my role on the project was to turn the process that he'd created into computer code so that we could automate the process a bit more and do the calculations potentially for any area within Cumbria, or nationally indeed. So following this, I was able to do the calculations for Keswick and some other areas. I think we've done about 11 areas now in total. Let me just make sure I'm on the right screen. And I'm going to try and explain the process in as straightforward terms as possible. So do interrupt me and ask questions as we go along if anything isn't clear. And I'll also give a few more technical details later if you're interested. So let's talk about the problem that we've got. I don't know how well that's coming up on your screen, but this is a map of Settle, Giggleswick, Langcliffe, which you'll be far more familiar with than I am. And the problem basically comes down to, can we take an area on the map of a particular community and draw a boundary around it like this? So there are the three parishes. Can we calculate which roofs receive enough sunlight in order to be suitable for a solar installation? And most importantly, can we do this with publicly and freely available data? So I'm going to talk about the two types of data that we use. Let me just skip ahead a bit here. So I've zoomed in a little bit here to the center. And the first set is reasonably straightforward. And this is Ordnance Survey data showing building outlines. So this is the freely available data. I think they do a slightly more up-to-date and accurate version if you are a paid customer. But we wanted to make this so that it was as accessible as possible. And so you can see the various building outlines in the center there. And these are approximately correct. At least it gives us a starting point for the center for each building. The second set of data is a little bit more difficult to explain. Now, this is three-dimensional data. So I'll try and explain what you're seeing here over the course of a few slides. And what it's doing is it's showing the height of buildings, vegetation, other structures, and even the landscape itself above sea level. And the resolution of this data is 1 meter, which means there's 1 point for every square meter at ground level. So basically what we get is an image where each pixel is 1 point on the map. And lighter areas are higher up and conversely darker ones lower down. So what you'll see here, and if you can see my mouse, but over on the western side, we've got the light color of the hill over on that side, and again over to the eastern side, and also to the north. And you can just see Giggleswick quarry, I think that is, just there as a dip, as a darker area. And you might be able, well, let's see what this looks like in 3D, because that's a bit of a better way of visualizing this. So I've got a kind of video that I recorded of a 3D mock-up of that data. I'll have to start that. Zoom through a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pan down and zoom through the town, and see what that looks like in 3D. So again, you've got the higher area over to the eastern side and sort of northwest, I suppose. And if we zoom through, you'll start to see some of those areas. And you'll start to see, well, we're actually flying around behind the mountain now. So what you can imagine is if the sun's low in the sky, that mountain is going to obscure certain buildings and certainly reduce the amount of sunlight or eliminate the sunlight that's going to fall at that particular time of day. Now, zooming in a bit further, you might be able to see some of the structures a bit now. So you'll be able to see, perhaps in there, you might start to see some of the trees and buildings in there. I don't know how clear that is on the screen there. I'll just move on to the next slide. In fact, there's a repeat of this, but at a higher resolution now. Let me just skip through this a little bit. And if if we pause there, if we pause there, you can see the cricket club there, the bowling green here, and a couple of rugby pitches down to the south. Very, very flat areas, and the rest of it you can see kind of the bulges sticking out for various buildings and hillsides, and you'll see the 3D nature of this as we go through. Sorry, I just keep trying to flick onto the next screen, but as we go down, you can see this more in 3D, and you can start to see the trees, in fact, in this video. And you can see each the buildings, not a very high resolution here data, so you can't see all the detail, but you can certainly start to see some of the structure. And the railway line over to the left here. So you can kind of imagine that you've got, as well as kind of the angle of the rooftops that you're building or modeling here, you've also got the various obstructions in the way, like trees and mountainsides, and that everything's going to have an impact on how much sunlight is falling on a particular building. So let's look at the parish church here. This is just a screenshot from Google Maps. And you might be able to tell, this is just a photograph, a satellite photograph. So you've got the ridge of the roof here and the two sides of the roof falling down away on each side, to the east and west. Then you've got the tower over to the north west over here, and then in the far northwestern corner you've got a spire as well, which you can't see from that. But if we then go to 3D data, you can start to see that with the color map here, or the black and white map. You'll see the ridge of the roof here, and you can see the two sides of the roof falling away. The relatively flat tower here, and then finally the spire, and the highest point is the top of the spire there. Now this isn't particularly high resolution data, and it's one of the frustrations of working away from the big cities, is that data is not brilliant, but we can do things with it. So let's see what that actually looks like if you were to sort of mock that up in 3D, and you'll see the back of the church, the other side of the church here. We've got the spire. So what I've done is basically I've projected a satellite photo, and I've used the 3D data to kind of draw that out of the 2D shape, if you like. So you can see that in 3D here. You can see the spire, you can see the tower and the two sides of the Paris church, and various trees around the side of it that are going to cause obstructions to the sun's rays at different times of day, and the two sides of the roof sloping down. So what you want to do is try to work out if there are flat areas on the side of this church, for example, on the rooftops, that can be used potentially for solar panels. I mean, the church might not be the best example because of listed building status and that kind of thing, but this is typically what we're going to do with the building. We've got various buildings around the outside here. So we've got the industrial buildings, I would guess, here. You can even see the cars poking out. From that snapshot of data. So if I just animate that slightly, just for a minute or two, let's just try to, sorry, you get a bit of a sense of the 3D shape there. So this data is basically created, it's kind of analogous to radar, and it's used by kind of flying planes over the target area and bouncing laser light off each point on the ground, and basically timing how long each reflection takes to come back. And from that, they can fairly accurately model how high each point is above the ground. So it's called LiDAR data. And it's, I think it's taken by DEFRA, and they do that for the whole of the UK now. Unfortunately, in cities, you get really high resolution of perhaps 0.5 meter or even 25 centimeters. And in more rural areas, unfortunately, we have to use 1 meter resolution data. So how are we actually going to find these areas on rooftops? Well, there are basically 4 stages to this algorithm that we use. And it's the job of this algorithm to calculate the eventual roof shapes and to use geometry to work out how much sunlight each roof shape might receive. It's a 4-stage algorithm. Each stage involves lots of calculations, and it can take many hours or days, or even weeks sometimes on a fast computer. So the first stage is basically to identify flat areas on roof. And I don't mean level areas, I mean areas of kind of contiguous or continuous slope and aspect. So when I talk about slope here, I'm talking about the angle to the ground, and aspect, I'm talking about the north, south, east, west direction. And discounting flat roofs, the simplest roof shape has 2 sides sloping in opposite directions and a single roof ridge. And that's the kind of shape that you would see from the roof of the church. So we've got to somehow take into account kind of roofs at different heights for buildings of multiple stories, dormer windows, chimneys, and other obstructions, and even trees growing ahead. And it's the job of the algorithm to try and disentangle all that. So the second stage is to take into account the surrounding landscape and nearby structures, roofs, trees, etc., to calculate the shadow, which might reduce sunlight falling on each roof area. And we eliminate those roofs that we deem to be in too much shadow. The third stage is to eliminate roofs that are too small to support solar, and also those north-facing roofs which won't receive enough sunlight. And the fourth stage is we use geometry and historical weather conditions to estimate how much sunlight might fall on the remaining roofs, and estimate the power which might be generated from such an installation if you were to put solar panels on there. So let's look at how that might look in practice, or how it looks for Settle. So here's the very center of Settle, and I'm going to put over the top the building shapes. Now these are very approximate, as I've talked about. The map that I'm using underneath, if you're interested, is the OpenStreetMap. So they also have their buildings data, which is a different set of data. And when we do when we run stage 1 of the algorithm, and we find the flat areas or roof areas within that part of Settle, if you like, what we find is these yellow areas. So each of these is a single flat or kind of continuously sloped roof area. Now you can see some of these are very small and will probably get eliminated because they'll be too small to support solar, and some of them are much larger. Some of them are north facing quite clearly on the top of buildings. You can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a north facing roof and south facing roof here. But larger areas might be fine, but we can't tell them until we actually process the data. So once we run through that elimination process, these are the results we get. So we eliminate an awful lot of those roof shapes, and what's left are these purple roofs, or lilac colored roof. These are some small fraction of the original roof or flat roof areas. So I'm going to take away the yellow roofs, and that's what you get. And I don't know how many of you will have seen the map that currently exists online for this, but this is basically what you get. And these aren't, as you can see, they're not perfect rectangles, as you might expect, simply because this is just a mathematical model, and simply it's a kind of artifact of the mathematical process we run through. But I'll talk a little bit more about how we decide what's allowable shortly. So from what we find with settle is, I think this is correct, and the figures I've got written down here. There were 1,481 Ordnance Survey building shapes, and this produces 2,126 roof areas. So you get slightly more roof areas than there are buildings. And the calculation we do is that I think you were reading the figures out earlier, Sandy, but this was over the course of a year, you get 3.3 gigawatt hours of electricity modeled if you were to put panels on each of those roofs. So I don't know if this is a good point to break off to show you the spreadsheet that you receive. Well, I'll do that in a moment. So here's an example of a web map. It's not the one from Settle. It's a video from Arnside. In fact, I created in Arnside, and it's just simply a video of me hovering over various sections of roof. And what you see there, if I just pause that as we get to a particular roof area. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll just naturally go to the space bar to pause the video. So what you see there is if you hover over a particular roof area, you see each roof area has an ID number, and these are listed in order of essentially the order of the estimated amount of electricity you get from that roof. So the very biggest and most valuable roofs in the survey, or the most valuable roof in the survey in terms of solar power generation, is roof number 1, and the least well, in the case of Settle, the smallest roof will have an ID of 2126, I think. You can see the Ordnance Survey coordinates there that help you find that roof again, and you can basically cross-reference that with the spreadsheet that I'll show you in a moment. It also shows you the predicted number of panels that you might be able to install on that roof area and the estimated solar power output. In this case, that's 9 megawatt hours over the course of a year. So I just play that through. You'll notice some icons up here. Part of the reason I don't do this live is simply because the icons appear too small if I'm trying to do this from my own screen. So I'll show you what happens if you want to find a particular roof. So let's say we want to identify which roof in this map has an ID of 1. So we're going through the spreadsheet, which I'll show you in a moment, and we want to find which of these roofs is the most valuable. So let me play again. So there's a binocular symbol here. If I press on that, if I click on that and type in the number 1 here, for some reason that's gone back to the beginning again. Right, so if I type in 1 there and click on that. That then takes me to roof number 1. I can also zoom in and out of this map. And the quickest way of doing that, if you've got one, is to use a mouse wheel. If you happen to be working with a mouse, but this map will work with mobile and laptop quite easily. And there's roof number 2. We've gone through the same process. So if I break off from here and show you the spreadsheet, I'm just going to do this live here from my computer. So let me tell you if let me just share that spreadsheet with you. If I can find that. I'm just trying to find the spreadsheet screen within. Excuse me, everybody. Right, here we go. So you should be able to see a spreadsheet there. I don't know how that looks on your screen, on your projection there. But each of these rows is in the spreadsheet essentially shows you one of these roofs on the web map. And they're ordered from 1 to, that was 2126, wasn't it? So the roof at the top, in this case, has an ID of 1. In theory, you can install 682 panels on that roof area. And the expected annual energy generation from there is 144,000 megawatt hours of electricity from that one particular roof. And you can see as you go down to the bottom of the screen, I really don't know whether you can see this or not, but if I look at roof number 2126, you can install 7 panels on that, and that produces just 900 kilowatt hours of electricity in a year. And there's a cutoff below that particular roof area. But you've got I know that Sandy's got a copy of that. So you should all be able to access that spreadsheet and find your particular roof in that data. So if I stop sharing the spreadsheet and go back to the presentation. Okay. Which I hope you can see again. So this particular web map, or the Settle one, in fact, is currently online, and I know that you're going to transfer it to your own website. So it will be online from now on, and that will be perfectly accessible. So any of you will be able to go in and see your own roof and try and see whether it's actually showing on the map. Okay, so I'm just going to go through in a little bit more detail each of those stages of the algorithm, each of those 4 stages. So essentially the way that we define flat roof areas, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, they're groups of pixels in that map. So remember each pixel is a 1 meter square area at ground level, and they're groups of pixels with common slope and aspect. Excuse me, I've just lost where I am in my notes because there's something I need to talk about here. So what we do is we basically find the slope of each of those pixels on the map in the 3D data by looking at the 4 sides or the 4 corners of that pixel and calculating which direction it slopes in. And then we have to identify groups of pixels that are pointing both in the same direction, so north, south, east, west, and also have common slope. And when I mean slope, I mean whether your roof is sloping at 30 degrees or 45 or 60, which are very common slopes for roofs. And once we've grouped those, that's how we produce those yellow areas in the map that I showed you earlier. So let's move on to how we calculate the shadow and the energy calculations. So what we do is we calculate something called an energy raster, which is a calculation of the sunlight energy which falls on each point in the area of interest over the course of a year. And it essentially looks like an image showing how much sunlight falls on that pixel of the map. So let's go to the image. So this is the calculation for settle, and I've zoomed into the middle here. This is the same area that I was showing earlier on the map. And you can see that lighter areas on the map receive more energy and darker areas receive less. So let's take a typical roof here. If you can see my mouse here, but you can see to the north side, we're receiving relatively little energy and much more energy on the south side of the roof. Now, there are some dark pixels in there, which does suggest there are obstructions in that area, and also in between the buildings, you certainly have no sunlight at all. So we take into account direct sunlight. So that's the sun's rays directly falling on the roof area, and diffuse sunlight, which is reflected from clouds, the atmosphere, and other structures in the map. So moving on to the shadow calculation, we try to approximate how big the shadow effects are for each point on the roof. So we take 4 dates. Well, that's each point in the map. In fact, we take 4 dates, the 2 solstices and the equinoxes as well, and we generate a shadow factor for them. So the shadow factor is 0 if there's no light falling, and 1 if it's 100% illuminated over the year. And we basically multiply those shadow factors together for those 4 dates, and we eliminate roofs where the shadow factor multiplied over those 4 dates is less than 0.5. So what does that look like in practice? Well, this is the shadow for March. It doesn't really matter which year you take. So we've done this for March here, and remember, this is all theoretical. And you can see quite a lot of this map is illuminated. Some dark shadows between the buildings, but generally what you see is illuminated roofs. I think what's in the middle here, well, that's not a regular building, but yet there are also there are examples of vegetation dotted around here as well that fairly obvious. I think this is a tree here. If we then move on to June, it's even brighter. So very, very few shadow areas in June. Almost all roofs get some sunlight, or a great deal of sunlight, in fact. But then if we look at December, the map becomes very, very dark. And that's partly a factor of the direction of sunlight in this country in December. Now, one of the ways that this model was created was by talking to solar installers, and they were very keen to tell us that they don't like installing panels on roofs that don't receive any sunlight at all in winter. And you can imagine why that's the case, because if you've got zero generation in winter, you're missing out, even if it's overcompensated by the summer, and perhaps in the summer you might receive plenty of electricity and it might be more than you can use. So they like to make sure that you've got a spread of electricity generated throughout the year. And so for that reason, this December shadow map is particularly influential in the final calculation, and an awful lot of roofs get eliminated because of shadows in the winter. And finally, the minimum roof size. Well, we were told that a typical solar panel has an area between 1.65 and 1.75 meters. And we were also told that solar installers consider a 2 kilowatt array to be the smallest viable, which is 6 panels of the above size typically. Although since we've been creating these maps, we have found that there are 1 kilowatt arrays dotted around the place. So this may not be strictly true. And by modeling this, by the time you factor in a kind of a border for the panel area, and the fact that panels need to be oriented in rectangles, you can't just have them in blobs, as we've shown you. The realistic minimum area that we need for an installation turns out to be 16 square meters. So essentially, we eliminate any of those blobs, or those yellow blobs on the map, that are smaller than 16 square meters. And certainly later, when I was looking in the literature, I've seen other studies, or some other studies, that have assumed an 8 square meter minimum. So I think that the map that we produce is quite conservative here in terms of its potential. So you may find there are plenty of roofs that are still viable. So this flowchart here provides the process, and you can see we start over here, and if the area of the roof is smaller than 16 square meters, we immediately eliminate it from our map. If the shadow factor is less than 0.5, we also eliminate it from the map. Now, with the remaining roofs, if the slope of that roof is less than 10 degrees, so that means essentially what you've got is an almost flat roof. We consider that roof to be flat, and what installers will do is, if they're able to, they'll install the roof at an angle on supports on that flat roof, and it's possible to do that at less than 10 degrees. But if it's not less than 10 degrees, we then check the aspect of that roof, now which direction, north, south, east, west it's pointing in, and we eliminate that section that's between east, northeast and west, northwest, which I think comes out as 135 degrees. So we lose about a third of our building roofs because they're too north facing. And then with the remainder of the roofs, we eliminate those that have a slope that's greater than 60 degrees because they're too steep to install solar. So that's the elimination process in a flowchart. So let's look at imperfections in the algorithm. So it is far from perfect. The original data is not perfect in the first place. And I've talked a bit about the resolution. It's very low resolution. And 1 point every square meter is really on the boundary of what you can do something with, what's viable. The data itself has artifacts, because when you're taking that LiDAR image, just like with radar, it's not, the original data doesn't come back in a perfect grid. It comes back as something called a point cloud, which is a whole array of random points in that area, and then DEFRA will turn that into a grid effectively before they release it. And finally, there's noise in the data, and each of those pixel points is said to be accurate to within 15 centimeter. So you can imagine there might be a particularly noisy pixel in that data, and those of you who do photography will know that you produce noise in any camera sensor. It's the same sort of idea. So if you have a particular noisy pixel, you might disrupt a particular roof. And for all these reasons, I think the algorithm certainly misses some valid areas, and it's quite conservative. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we certainly want to go after the most viable roofs first in any group effort. So, for these reasons, it really is worth remembering that it's a useful tool for an area as a whole, but not as a replacement for a survey on an individual roof. So certainly don't go ahead and install solar without a tailored survey, but it's a great starting point for a group. And Molly, who is my contact at CAFS, has been working on a whole number of these areas, and they're finding as they go that this has been a great starting point, and almost all of those areas are now working to produce some kind of group effort community solar project. So one last observation at the end of the presentation to leave you with is this chart. And what this shows you, what I've done here is I've divided each of those, or I divide those 2,000 roof areas into quartiles. So I divided them into quarters. So the blue area here are the 25% of the smallest roofs, or smallest generating roofs, if you like. The red area up here is the largest quarter, the quarter of largest generating roofs. And in between, you've got the other two quarters. So what you find is if you were to one thing, well, it's worth remembering that if you were to concentrate on the 62%, or sorry, the 25% of most valuable roofs in that survey that you'll see at the top of the spreadsheet, in theory, they could produce 62% of your solar power. So that's one thing to be worth considering. It doesn't mean these aren't worth it at all, because a small 6-panel installation on a home could be very valuable for the homeowner, and certainly in terms of reducing carbon footprint. But and this is the most pronounced graph I've done, in fact, for any area. So Settle clearly has some very valuable roofs in its boundary. Now the map's currently available here, but I know that you're going to transfer it to your own website, or your own community website, and there will be a report available shortly with summary of the information I've talked about, and I'll try and include any answers to any questions that you talk about, or you're going to ask me shortly if you have questions. That spreadsheet's also available, and all of this is information, hopefully, to help you with your goal of decarbonising Settle. Thank you. So hopefully you've got some questions.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that. It's taken a lot of concentration. But first of all, I must make an apology. When I introduced you, I omitted to actually give you background. So, if you don't mind, I'll put on the right line. Tom has been a software engineer for most of his career, and started out with a PhD in physics. He now works as a research software engineer in the biostatistics team at Lancaster University. He's originally from the southeast, moved to Lancaster in 2018 with his young family. He joined the university in 2019 and started working in the Knowledge Business Exchange Centre, writing software for local businesses, charities, and Cumbria. This is how he got involved in solar therapy work, charity Cumbria Action for Sustainability CAFS. We heard about Tom's work from CAFS and invited him to carry out this solar therapy. So sorry about not saying that in the first place, Tom. Thanks very much for the presentation. And of course, the map and details will be going on the website, so we'll have time to review it at leisure. But in the meantime, if there are any questions to put to Tom, we would be glad to hear them.
If I might just ask the first question, what's the sort of date, Tom, on some of the data? I'm thinking particularly buildings don't change heights much, but trees do. And I just wondered what the date of the data was.
Well, the date is from the end of last year. So there was a big update over the course of the second half of last year. So before that, I'd been working for other towns with much older data, 2 or 3 years ago. But the LiDAR data is 2022, end of 2022. But I can't tell you exactly on the Ordnance Survey data. I know they keep it up to date. Oh, and I can tell you actually, because I downloaded that at the beginning of this year. So that's, according to Ordnance Survey, that's up to date. from the beginning of 2023.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi there, Keith Horston. I had solar panels fitted on my roof in June 2021, so last year was a full year. And I have to say that looking at your estimation of how much generation it will produce, it's almost spot on in terms of kilowatt hours per year. However, you suggested that, or the software suggests that we have solar panels on our west facing and our east facing, and you say that we should have, I think it was 24 panels. Well, we've got 18 on the west facing one. So, you know, I can see that there are some areas where it's going to be quite difficult to estimate, but there's nothing better than actual an on-site survey to try and get a better picture of what's going on. But it's quite encouraging that the actual amount is quite close.
That's good to know. That's very good to know, actually.
Yes, I can confirm that on my roof as well, I checked the map. What I'm getting does correspond really well with what you've got on that. I think one of the main things that I think this map is going to be useful for is what I want to try and do is to get a bulk purchase and installation contract going, because I feel that that will be a much more efficient way of developing the solar potential rather than what we have at the moment, individual houses putting up their own panels ad hoc. We would save on scaffolding, mobilization, and bulk buying. And I think by looking at the results on Tom's map, we could see areas in the town where it would be worth investigating, getting a group of people together to put up solar.
Another piece of data.
I can only just hear you.
Hold on, sorry, I'm not holding it, I've got it now. My heart fell when I discovered that my slopes were perfectly east, perfectly west. So I nevertheless went ahead and had 8 panels installed on each face. Now I haven't met this algorithm before, so I don't know what he predicted, as if I could find out. But 3 megawatt hours per annum is what I generate. Now our church has 16 panels. I think basically it's not quite south, but it's not far off. And that generates a very similar amount, not as much, sorry, more than 2 east-west panels, but nevertheless, I was pleased with the amount that it generates.
That's great.
Hello, My name is Barry White, but I'm going to call myself confused or settled because I live on our Elf Hill. The house is approximately 618 feet above sea level. And according to this map here, it says my home isn't suitable for solar panels, which is why I wonder whether I should take my 16 solar panels off, because it's more than suitable. Faces south, gets very good light and sunlight, and doesn't even do too badly in the winter. I'm delighted that Keith's property has come out well, but according to this here, my property, I shouldn't even think about it. So does this raise questions about the how kosher this survey is? You did help for me early on about it, but it's very disappointing to see that I shouldn't really put solar panels on my house. Thank you.
Well, Barry, the map that you're looking at is actually a map of oh, you're looking at this map? Yeah. Yeah, but that map on there is actually a map. This one.
I didn't catch all that, but I think basically what you're saying is that the model predicts that you shouldn't have paddles on there, but you do, and you're very pleased with it. So it is indeed really conservative, and it gets things wrong.
It just emphasises that we really need a detailed check on each individual property before making any commercial decisions.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why you can't have a solar survey, like a proper on-site survey done, you know, even if it doesn't appear on the map, because as I've said, the algorithm's quite conservative. So your particular installer might see a way of doing it that's just the mathematical modeling can't see. So how many panels, can I just ask, Barry, how many panels you've got on the roof?
16.
16?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's...
area is taken over. And it's fantastic, especially in this weather.
Have you got...
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask you, have you got any obstructions near the house? Because sometimes...
No.
Okay. Okay.
The most beautiful tree on the other side, which faces north, but the sun is not obstructed by that.
Okay. I mean, like, what can I say? The algorithm didn't find it. But I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased that you've got them.
Yeah, I think it's not perfect, but it's a very good guide. Anybody else got any other questions or points that they would like to raise?
So back to me. Thank you ever so much, Tom. I'm Sarah, the voluntary coordinator. We liaised a bit on email. Very much appreciate you coming this evening and starting to unravel the data for us. Tom has mentioned a couple of times the information that we will have available. So we will have this map and we will have Tom's report, as he mentioned. We're just about to have a revised website go live in the next month or so. So we're not going to pay twice because there will need to be a liaison between Mark Dale, who most of you probably know, who runs our current website, and then connecting to the new website. So if you would like to leave us your email, if you're not already on our email list, then we can make sure that you will have access to this data. And I'm sure we'll be putting some articles in the credit area, etc. But if you don't need the credit, then we'll be very pleased to be in touch with you. The other thing to say perhaps is if you have a property, once you've maybe looked at the data, and are thinking actually I might be in one of these clusters where there are a number of roofs who could benefit from some bulk purchasing, then if you'd like to let us know, that would be useful. We're not going to be in the business of being an intermediary in terms of contracts and all the rest of it. But obviously we will do our best to ensure that the process is more streamlined. Tom mentioned Cumbria Action for Sustainability in Molly. They've done a lot of work in Ambleside, so we are kind of following track what they're doing there, borrowing their ideas as much as we can. The other thing probably to say is that to some extent we've obviously focused a little bit about the individual domestic roofs, but clearly as Tom has shown, there are a lot of very big roofs. Some of you will know obviously that the swimming pool had 52 panels put on last August, and they're fundraising for a further 52. So we will be looking at the bigger roofs. There are panels on this church with potential to have some added. The Methodist Church is over the way, the same. And we do have our eye on other roofs. So roofs, for example, it would be nice to see them covering their roof. So it might well be that another route would be to encourage as many as possible of these bigger roofs to be generating solar, which then would then connect into our idea for a local energy club, which would mean that we'll have a number of generators providing electricity into the club, and then there'll be a number of consumers or a mix of the two, where we would agree on an annual basis a tariff for the generator, tariff for the consumer, which would be at a much better rate than we would currently be receiving from some of the big suppliers. So if you see in our information or information going forward, as mentioning about the Settle Energy Local Club, that will be what it's about. And we will be hoping to launch that later in the year. So keep your eyes open for that information. But it's great to see so many of you come along on a sunny evening. Hopefully, the potential to take advantage of the sunshine will become more obvious as we interrogate this data. And hopefully at some point, we could become considerably more better off in terms of local energy generation. We currently are, at least electricity generation, I should say. So, thank you ever so much for coming. Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you to Paul for making it possible to connect with Tom. We will be making this recording available. I guess I could say to Paul, we can stop the recording, so that will definitely be available. And if you want to say to give us your